48,000 files from the Epstein database have actually apparently been removed, some of them even alleging malfeasance with the current president of the United States. Now, I decided I wanted to look into the story because there's actually a lot to discuss here. There's been some crazy depositions. You've got Bill and Hillary Clinton both yapping now in front of the actual government. Yes, we have depositions of both Bill and Hillary. So it's been a wild, wild set of days indeed. So I want to just kind of like go through all of this, kind of pick apart a lot of the fluff, and really bring you the meat of the situation. So out of the 48,000 files that have actually been removed, and a lot of people can verify this for themselves by going to the Department of Justice's website, the Epstein Files, and actually reading these for themselves, right? So for instance, there's a way for you to actually browse the entire files for yourself. You can put in anything you want here, hit that big old search button, or you can go to the DOJ disclosures and you can actually see all of the data sets that have been released, which there are about 12 of. Now, a lot of people have been looking at these data sets, for instance, and have noticed that the actual numbering pattern around them, which would be EFTA, like for example 012, 62, 782, and then of course you've got EFTA 012, 62, 784. You might be wondering and sitting there, it's like, wait, if it's released, numbered sequentially, shouldn't we be able to see the number 3, right? Shouldn't there be a 012, 62, 783? That's a good question, actually. And in some cases, you can actually open up some of these files, for instance, and see that that is actually bundled with other files. So it's not exactly easy, but for a lot of individuals out there, there have actually been groups like NPR that have actually been investigating and have said that the Justice Department has withheld and removed some files related to Trump, right? And that was, again, like an insane claim to be making. So, of course, how did NPR do this? They did it the exact same way that I kind of talked about, too. They reviewed multiple sets of unique serial numbers appearing before and after the pages in question, stamped into documents in the file database, FBI case records, emails, and discovery documents. And, of course, the NPR investigation then found that dozens of pages that appear to be cataloged by the Justice Department actually aren't shared publicly as they're legally required. So wild stuff. And of course, obviously, there have been actual committee members in the government, like Robert Garcia, who's like, wait a minute, I reviewed unredacted evidence logs at the DOJ, and I can confirm that the DOJ appears to have illegally withheld FBI interviews with survivors who accuse Trump of heinous crimes. So again, people don't know whether there's a cover-up actually happening. To be real with you, I'm not a naive person. I think there's definitely a cover-up, and it's definitely not just to assist the President of the United States. I think it's to assist the whole class of billionaires and super powerful people that have been implicated in these crazy files. Now, the reason why 48,000 files were suddenly removed all of a sudden was not because that there's a war taking place and the government thinks that maybe people can be, maybe people are completely distracted, right? Whether it's aliens or a fucking war, maybe as long as people aren't talking about these files, maybe it's a net win. Now, the government has removed these because apparently they've done such a terrible job with redacting personally identifiable information for victims that a lot of lawyers have come flag certain files. Per what the government says, they've removed these files so that the lawyers can re-review them and make sure that further redactions can be placed so that, these people can't be re-victimized. But here's the thing, right? No matter what the government does or says, thankfully, there are ways for us to independently verify. For instance, jmail.world has done such a great job at archiving this that they really do deserve like a fucking ultra medal. They've done so many jobs at this that they've even categorized every single type of mail into individual topics, right? Things like key properties, travel destinations, intelligence and state connections. And this is important for everyone because I think there's so much information that we need to be able to absolutely sort of parse it in a very easy to read way. There's been a lot of shit in these emails that don't even relate specifically to the human trafficking. Some of them relate to his connections, Jeffries in particular, with state leaders, people, who are, former prime ministers to countries like Israel, his connections to allegedly some of the most, insane foreign intelligence, communities. This is a guy that's so fucking well connected at such a high level that people are, it almost feels like everything ties back to him when you look at the richest individuals around the world, right? Crazy shit. But you can remove every single file from this. Thankfully, the communities of the world, thankfully the open source community has basically kept all of these files available and archived. So if the government really just wants to remove stuff, they can remove them from their own sites. That's fine. You can't remove it from the citizen sites, unless you go down a whole different rabbit hole there. But thankfully, there have been some good things that have come out of the Epstein files in that even if the United States seems like it's incredibly compromised when it comes to delivering justice, like they want to just make this go under the rug, there's been a lot of arrests and resignations around the world too, particularly in Europe, right? We talked about, Prince Andrew. We also need to talk about Peter Mandelson, who was the former British ambassador. Both of these guys actually arrested. And even if they were released the day of, the actual investigations are still commencing on these people, right? Just the arrest is already a slap to these people's dignity and respect that they covet so much, but the investigation is a good thing to see. There's individuals that have resigned from various posts because they've been connected to Epstein, and because people have been rightfully calling for why that has happened, they've resigned in grace. Some of these people have been apologizing for it alongside resigning. So it's a good thing to see that in some parts of the world, there is actually some level of justice being done. Even when it comes to some of the richest guys in the world who dictate what we get to do day in and day out and decide policy, people like Bill Gates, for instance, actually finally had to say that they regret their involvement with it. They've even said things like, I did nothing illicit, I saw nothing illicit. He acknowledged that he had 2 affairs with women that Epstein later discovered, but said that they didn't involve his victims, which kind of a convenient thing to say. To be clear, I've never spent any time with victims, the women around him, he said. It was a huge mistake to spend time with them, and I apologize to other people who are drawn into this because of the mistake that I made. Now, do you believe Bill Gates at his word here? I personally don't, but it's insane to think that this wouldn't even been happening if these files had never been released to begin with. Remember, the fact that these files released is what has put so much pressure on some of the richest, most powerful individuals in the world, right? To the point where they actually have to acknowledge and talk about this. Now, it's crazy to think that this situation has been, again, so politicized that you've got statements from people like Chuck Schumer saying stuff like this. This is insane. This wouldn't have happened probably like 10 years ago, but listen to shit like this.
Let me be blunt. There's a massive cover-up going on in the Justice Department to protect Donald Trump and people associated with Jeffrey Epstein. As we expected, Trump, Bondi, and their missions and their minions have played games with the release of these files. They release some documents that they want to release and continue to hide others.
Now, I don't necessarily disagree with it, but bro, you have a lot of power in the government. Now, again, a lot of these people have kind of come together from party lines. I think for a lot of these individuals, for a lot of these politicians making bold claims like that, it's like, listen, you've seen what the unredacted files are, and it's kind of insane to me that nothing has actually leaked from any of these politicians, and none of these people have actually, brought up, none of these people, if there is any actual credible evidence to go on, either shit or get off the pot, either actually bring it up, make it so that it's so publicly known that eventually, no matter how compromised the Justice Department is, they have to actually pursue with some form of an investigation, right? If there is actually something in here that exists that could actually bring down, and again, it doesn't have to just be any president. I don't really care what side of the aisle this is hitting, right? I have no desire to see Trump go down or if he's innocent, then good, he's innocent. But if he's guilty, he's guilty. And the same thing goes for people like Bill Clinton, for instance. Now, speaking of the Clintons, they've actually been interestingly, resistant to being questioned the whole time. So back in August 2025, they were actually, subpoenaed for the Epstein files, right? Both, the Clintons were brought in. And of course, at the time, both Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton didn't actually want to jump through with it, right? Because after they were asked in August of 2025, for months, they were actually defying these lawful subpoenas to the point when a lot of these, Democrats and Republicans were like, hold on, wait, we should have a vote to hold these people in contempt if they're not going to come and fail to appear. Because The Clintons thought that they didn't have to. They thought that none of these were actually enforceable at the time. So obviously when there was a official contempt being threatened, then they decided, you know what, we're just going to show up and agree. Okay, we're just going to actually show up, we're going to come up, we're going to discuss everything. So no matter what people like Bill Clinton say, where they're like, release all the files and I'm going to be very compliant, they have shown a history of not complying to any of this stuff. Until, of course, they were absolutely forced to. Like, teeth were literally being pulled at this point. Now, of course, a lot of these were actually happening behind closed doors, which ultimately is of no importance to me. I want to actually see stuff that's released publicly. And thankfully, in this case, there have been public depositions. So we're going to go through what the actual, like, Clintons have said and just kind of go through the big key highlights as we go through this video.
Said that you've never been to Mr. Epstein's island, is that correct?
You know what? I am so tired of answering that question. If you have one scintilla of evidence to the contrary, put it forward. I have never been on his island, period. I've never been in his homes, his offices, his anything. So I don't know how many times you have to say the same thing over and over and over again. And I just am struggling with the relevance of all of this. But no, I never have been.
So that's a pretty roundabout way of just saying, no, never been there. Now, again, the interesting thing about this is, like, you can just tell from here that she never wanted to be here. Like, for months, she was fighting to not come here. And when they ask her this question, she's like, listen, I'm fucking done. Mind you, this is also 4.5 hours of a deposition as well, too. So I can understand just being that frustrated. But at the same time, bro, when they ask you that question, it's like a yes or no question. You just have to say, no, I wasn't there. Simple as that, okay? And again, if you didn't lie about that, if you're not lying under oath, there's no shame in that. So, of course, then comes Billy Clinton talking about his relationship with being more businesslike. So listen to this.
Mr. President, were you ever in the position to owe Jeffrey Epstein a favor?
I didn't consider that. I thought we had an understanding about the airplanes, that he would let me use the airplane to set up my AIDS programs around the world if I'd agreed to talk to him for an hour about economics and politics on every long leg. I kept my word, and
You're telling me that the guy that you're telling me the guy you wrote like a little birthday note to and everything, like, obviously he was a little bit he was closer to the Epstein than I think most other people in it, right? There was like sending a guy an email, and then there's being on the plane, right? So his argument is like, I was just on the plane. I didn't think that I had to owe a favor. I just figured like he'd let me just bum on his plane, and all I have to do was talk about politics or economics for like a fucking hour. You honestly expect anybody to like just sit there and believe that there wasn't like some sort of favors beyond all of that you felt like you owed? There wasn't something like, just being that tangentially connected, that being that, being that friendly, so to speak, right? That you didn't that there wasn't something like behind the scenes that you would have had to offer. Again, a lot of this requires you to take these individuals at their word, and it's difficult to do that when you just know that these people are not trustworthy storytellers whatsoever, right? They're just trying to save their own skin in this situation. But again, given the fact that when we looked at people like Prince Andrew, who was, basically arrested on the idea of, giving classified information, it always makes me wonder, like, maybe that's what Epstein was trying to do, like maybe seek out more information. The guy was really good at seeking out information and sort of compiling it for his benefit in the market and beyond just the whole human trafficking angle of his life.
When you saw photos of your husband in a hot tub laying on a beach and getting massaged by other women, and you knew that Jeffrey Epstein was involved in some of these trips and these things, did it concern you at all?
I'm here not to offer my opinions. I'm here to answer specific questions to the best of my ability.
When you saw your husband in these photos with a young woman being massaged, what went through your mind?
I am not going to speculate.
I mean, she's clearly, listen, this is a woman that stuck by a guy after he, defiled their marriage in office. So, she's asking her this logical question. It's like, what's going through your mind is, your husband is with these younger women getting massaged. And I don't really think that there's much speculation. I think the actual relationship and the dynamic, understanding how the person feels emotionally in the situation is quite important. But you can see that she's obviously dodging the question. And of course, obviously the person answering the question, which is Nancy Mace, is getting a rise out of her too. Now, the next bit of story involves an individual known as Howard Lutnick, who is involved in a couple of business dealings specifically related to, I understand, a limited liability company with Epstein. And while he's not actually charged with any sort of criminal wrongdoing, he's sort of brought into the story because of, again, him being involved in business relationships, which obviously anybody connected to this guy, especially at that level, needs to be investigated, and people need to understand the nature of the connection over here. Now, Hillary Clinton was asked about this, and she had an interesting response, so I kind of want to play that.
I know Howard Lutnick because when I was senator on 9/11, the firm he headed, Cantor Fitzgerald, suffered the greatest loss of life. As I recall, something like 650 of his employees were murdered by terrorists that day. Howard Lutnick missed being a victim because he was delayed dropping his child off to kindergarten. You asked the question. I'm going to answer your question.
Now you're gonna yell
This
at
was
me?
what I spent
You're
my
going to yell at
time
me.
doing.
I'm a
I
survivor
spent
trying to look out for other survivors, trying to
and
get to the
I
bottom
was
of it.
taking care
You
of
waited
the
6
people
months
who
to
lost
get here today.
3,000
6 months,
lives
and now you're being
at World
defiant
Trade
and
Center.
indignant today.
Again, may I remind you, it could have just been a simple yes, no. Maybe I met the guy in DC once, but you decided to bring up the whole 9/11 bit as some sort of way to like exalt or like, bring her character up, when in reality it had almost nothing to do with the question that was basically being asked here.
Me think he was involved.
To get more information for this investigation, was wondering if you also agree that President Trump should answer questions of this committee.
That's for you to decide, but he did know him well, and I once had a brief discussion with him about it. The president
do you think you want to be today?
20-something years ago, never said anything to me to make me think he was involved in anything improper with regard to Epstein either. He just didn't. He just said we were friends,
I got a
and then we
bench for
had a
this
falling
match.
out over a land deal, property deal.
Now, again, this is a clip that I wanted to play because Bill Clinton basically says and exonerates from his understanding, obviously, that nothing untoward was happening with Trump and Epstein and, unfortunately, any minor. And the thing about it is, obviously, that's all I think he can say because maybe he genuinely didn't see anything happening over there. But there's also a darker way to look at this and think that maybe behind closed doors, both Trump and Clinton probably agreed to what they should say and get their facts straight and the story straight. There's a lot of ways to take this, but obviously these are older individuals, I guess. And to me, I think that there's a level of protecting each other here. But, for, again, full transparency's sake and full context, obviously this is him exonerating, or at least to his knowledge, right? Because he hasn't seen anything with his own eyes. To basically say that, Trump is not necessarily involved in the dirtiest of the dirty. But again, it's up to you to take this. It's up to you if you want to trust Bill Clinton at his word over here. But again, I wanted to play this clip for, again, the full context. Then, of course, down the road, she was asked about things like Pizzagate, for instance, which for anybody that doesn't know Pizzagate, this is Comet Ping Pong, which is actual chain, it's a pizza store where, again, it was tied because of the leaked emails from John Podesta, somebody who was attributed to Hillary Clinton. And in these emails, people were fishing through them, and basically they saw code words they thought that were related to a human trafficking, child trafficking ring. Now, again, whether this was legitimate or not is something that people have said has been very disproven. And of course, there were other things at the time too, like Frazzle Drip, for instance, which I remember when I was doing Deep Web every Sunday, there was people were like, did you find a Hillary Clinton video on the dark web? And even on the dark web, this is why I never took this stuff super seriously, because as somebody that browsed the dark web pretty actively at that time, I wasn't looking for anything illegal, but obviously if things like Frazzle Drip existed, you probably would have found it on a link list. You probably would have found it just under a general discussion on one of the big image boards or, the Reddit-like threads on the internet. The fact that nobody was taking it seriously even on the dark web and no videos or images ever really surfaced from that, other than fake stuff that would show up on Twitter here and there or Reddit or a conspiracy board on Reddit, this was something that obviously I at the time didn't take seriously, and many people who even were into conspiracy theories but were actually logically applying their brain cells weren't necessarily taking this seriously. But the thing about it is, I can actually understand the frustration from individuals like Hillary Clinton, where she talks about, I can't believe you're even referencing it. The things about it is that the connections that Pizzagate has to this is when we're looking at things like the mentions of jerky and recipes related to that, where people thought that code words in the Epstein documents were related. They were talking about something sinister just in plain English. And the thing about it is, there's a lot of stuff that you can go after. Like, let me bring up the reality here, right? Like, QAnon is a conspiracy theory that people grabbed into. But, in a way, QAnon is kind of it kind of vindicated itself through the Epstein files, because in this case, we actually do have a real human trafficking proven network, right, with actual billionaires and people's friends. There's actual real victims that we can 100% verify. And the thing about it is that you can reach down the conspiracy angles of, baby eating, cannibalism, crazy shit like that, or you can look at the actual facts, which are dark and decrepit on their own. And we can focus on that and bring the people attributed to that to justice rather than chasing, in some cases, what are actually phantoms. Now, look, there's a lot more to kind of discuss over here, but I feel like this video has gotten longer than it has, than it really needed to be. So ultimately, in the end, there is one more investigation that I do want to talk about, something that did open up. For instance, anybody that doesn't know what this coordinates lead to, this is the infamous Zorro Ranch, which is a property that was of great importance to Epstein. And this property, if you zoom out over here, ladies and gentlemen, is in the state of New Mexico. It's actually a fair bit out from places like Santa Fe, from places like Stanley, but of course, this little ranch was where a lot of evil has allegedly occurred. And of course, when you look at the actual photos from this area, which have recently come out by the DOJ, you can see that the interior is just genuinely a mindfuck. Like, just look at the actual design over here too, the chandeliers, the weird, like, colored chairs. Then, of course, the further you go down, I think one of the weirder images that I saw was this, like, pool where it almost looked like a liminal horror room for a minute. There was something that guys like Aiden Ross actually said that really stuck with me, where some of these rooms are designed in such a way that if you're like a victim and you happen to escape and reach law enforcement, then the rooms are designed in such a way where describing them makes you almost sound crazy, right? Like pastel pink walls, liminal white cream like design. People will have a hard time describing what the actual locations were looking like. Like, if you remember the images with the dentist chair, for instance, like if you actually escaped, went to law enforcement, and you tried describing the rooms that you were in, you'd almost sound like a crazy individual. And somehow I feel like that actually had that actually had some weight to it. Like, Aiden Ross actually did say something that actually really mattered, and maybe that's also one of the craziest parts about the story. Now, obviously, the really filthy part about this whole story, too, is, like, the feds at one point were actually asking, allegedly, New Mexico to halt the Epstein probe into Zorro Ranch, right? Which, again, for a lot of individuals, a lot of victims, was a serious, serious blow. And thankfully for them, at least in this case, they decided that because of the unsealed FBI files, there is actually a warranted case for a further examination. So now that that case has apparently been reopened, New Mexico is going to be looking in to what has actually happened with Zorro Ranch. But it makes you wonder, right? It's like, why did the FBI even intervene to begin with? And, why did that intervention even succeed, right? Like, if there's actual malfeasance to happen, the U.S. government, no matter what level, should pursue justice. The U.S. cannot claim to be a justice-loving country when this kind of shit is happening so blatantly. And of course, even in other cases, guys like Leon Black are actually being sued. For anybody that doesn't know, Leon Black, we talked about very briefly when he was connected through a big discussion towards Lifetouch, which was a company that dealt with taking photos, school photos of children. Now, of course, Leon Black was somebody that was associated through an investment firm, and that investment firm has also decided to come out and say that, again, we didn't know anything about that connection that Leon Black had. The facts matter. From an Apollo perspective, there's nothing new in these documents. Neither Mark Rowan nor anyone else, excluding Leon Black, had either a business or personal relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. Mr. Black, who left the firm in 2021, previously retained and compensated Mr. Epstein for personal tax advice. In select instances, Mr. Rowan and other Apollo employees provided information to Epstein in connection with his tax work. So again, Apollo will go and say, no, we didn't know anything about this. And again, whether you trust the company here or not is entirely up to you. But it's just another example of high-profile exits and actual consequences happening because of these files. You know, for as messy of a release as this is, I don't want to make these videos just focusing on the negative. I think there is a good positive amount when you do get to talk about people, you know, actually resigning, people apologizing, people being arrested, and investigations that were once shut down finally being reopened. I think it's important that we keep discussing these files because I think they affect everyone. I think, you know, if we ever are okay with a human trafficking network getting away like this, then I don't think any other claim of justice is ever really valid. So in regards to everything that's been happening around the world, whether aliens are being disclosed or war in Iran is being used as a distraction in some ways from these files, keep talking about it, keep sharing it, and keep holding your government accountable. Because these files don't just affect America. This was happening at an international scale. Every big country is involved in this. And really the most power any country can have to deal with justice here is the United States. And it's just, the only painful part about this is that's the only country not doing enough to seek justice. Anyways, ladies and gentlemen, this is me, Mutahar, and I'm out.
Donald Trump is panicking as Congress is trying to shut down his unlawful war against Iran on a bipartisan basis. Democrats and Republicans in the Senate, led by Democratic Senator Tim Kaine and Republican Senator Rand Paul, and in the House of Representatives, Republican Thomas Massie and Democratic Congressmember Ro Khanna, they are working to put forward a War Resolution Act, which would require Donald Trump to get authorization of Congress to continue this unlawful war against Iran. And if Donald Trump does not get congressional authorization, which he was required to do, frankly, anyway, under the Constitution, the war could be shut down. Now, Donald Trump has threatened that he would veto any War Resolution Act, and he has said that he would ignore it. Also, I don't think we even need a War Resolution Act, given that Congress has the authority when it comes to declaring war, and Donald Trump requires congressional authorization to declare a war in general. But regardless, this War Powers Act in the 1970s allows Congress to assert its authority over these areas. And that's precisely what these Democrats and Republicans are doing on a bipartisan basis. But Donald Trump is fighting it. Donald Trump has sent his MAGA Republican sycophants out there now to say this is not a war against Iran. This is actually a special military operation. And if that term sounds familiar to you and it sounds, I don't know, Russian, yeah, that's what Putin called his invasion of Ukraine, a special military operation. And that's essentially how Donald Trump and MAGA Mike and the MAGA Republicans are now trying to refer to this invasion against Iran as a special military operation. So they're saying it's not a war, then we don't need a declaration of war, and we don't need any type of war resolution at all. So let me show you what went down. Here you have MAGA Mike Johnson running away from Manu Raju when he was asked about any type of war powers resolution. MAGA Mike says, it's an operation, it's an operation, it's not a war, it's not a war. Here, play this clip.
This is a war. This is war right now.
I think it's an operation.
The people, U.S. servicemen are getting killed right now.
It's a dangerous operation and an important one. We had to act because we were an imminent threat. But there's not a declaration of war. We'll see y'all tomorrow.
Here you have MAGA Republican Senator Joni Ernst also saying, when Manu Raju was asking, well, why shouldn't Congress have voted to authorize this war in Iran? Why isn't that a Congress thing? And she goes, well, try to name for me any time Congress required where there was congressional authorization for war. And Manu Raju's like, Afghanistan and Iraq. They both had congressional authorization. She's like, oh, well, name me something else. And those were the two recent wars that got congressional authorization. I want you to see what goes down here. Play this clip.
So why shouldn't have Congress voted to authorize this war before it began, given that service members are losing their lives?
Yes, and I take that very personally. Obviously, I've served. My daughter serves on active duty now. But I would love for anyone to name the last time Congress authorized operations or strikes in other countries.
Iraq and Afghanistan. This is serious.
And we're just a few days in.
So then the White House sent a letter purportedly under the War Powers Act where they're asserting, it's within, 48 hours or 2 days of the war beginning, but they're saying it's not a war. And again, they're saying it is a special military operation. This was the letter sent by Trump to Congress, or whoever wrote it on Trump's behalf to Congress, probably Elbridge Colby or, someone on Marco Rubio's team. March 2nd, 2026. Here's what it said. Dear Mr. President, I write to apprise you of military action taken on February 28th against the government of the Islamic Republic of Iran. I have separately notified you of changes in the global posture of United States forces in the Middle East in response to threats emanating from the then ongoing tensions with Iran. As I previously communicated to Congress, Iran remains one of the largest, if not the largest, state sponsors of terrorism in the world. Despite the success of Operation Midnight Hammer, the Iranian regime continues to seek the means to possess and employ nuclear weapons. Its array of ballistic, cruise, anti-ship, and other missiles pose a direct threat and are attacking United States forces, commercial vessels, and civilians, as well as those of our allies and partners. Again, there's no mention here of war or the fact that there were imminent strikes. And here's how it's detailed further in this letter by Trump. Although the United States desires a quick and enduring peace, it is not possible at this time to know the full scope and duration of military operations that may be necessary. As such, United States forces remain postured to take further action as necessary and appropriate to address further threats. I directed the military action consistent with my responsibility to protect Americans and United States interests. I'm providing this report as part of my efforts to keep Congress fully informed, consistent with the War Powers Resolution. And again, he's trying to say that it's actually not a war. So here you have Mark Wayne Mullen, MAGA Republican senator, also trying to say, this is not a war. No war is taking place, but he says it's a war. So then they go, you just said it's a war. He's like, oh, I must have misspoke. That's not really a war. Here, play this clip.
Are there measures being taken not to eliminate other possible alternatives to leadership?
This is war, and we're taking out the threats. And if you're part of the threat, then you're a target. What we'd call not all the arrows, but going after the archers.
You'll concede this is war. You'll concede this is war.
We haven't declared war. They declared war on us, but we haven't.
War. Secretary Hicks said
we haven't declared.
Just now, you said this is war.
They've called it war.
They've called it war. What I was saying. Okay, well that was a misspoke. What I was saying that they've declared war on us, but war is ugly. It always has been ugly. But we're taking out a regime that's been trying to attack us for quite some time.
But you're not conceding this is war.
We have declared war. So if we haven't declared war, then I don't see that. The president hasn't asked us to declare war yet, but they have declared war on us. We're just simply fighting the threat that's been at our door for 47 years. I've already answered the question.
Then you've got MAGA Mike Johnson over here saying that if you are trying to move forward a war powers motion to restrict Donald Trump's ability to engage in this unlawful war, you're a traitor, is basically what MAGA is saying. The idea that a few colleagues would try to move a war powers motion to the floor is dangerous. It plays into the hand of the enemy. So if you support the Constitution, Trump has ordered MAGA Mike and sycophants to say that means you support terrorists and you support Iran. That's what they're going with, right out of the playbook, right out of the neocon playbook that Donald Trump said, frankly, worse than the neocon, like way worse than the neocon playbook. The neocon playbook was bad. This is way worse. And Trump's whole campaign was like, we're against that. Like, y'all are that times 100. Anyway, play this clip.
Is squarely within the law. He used his discretion and his authority and the intelligence that he had, exquisite as it was, as is demonstrated by its effectiveness, and he did what he should have done as a commander-in-chief. The idea that a few colleagues here would try to move a war powers motion and resolution to the floor right now is dangerous. Imagine a scenario where Congress would vote to tell the commander-in-chief that he was no longer allowed to complete this mission. That would be a very dangerous thing. You see that Iran is firing almost seemingly indiscriminately at targets. They're trying to intimidate America. They're trying to test our resolve. And the idea that there's some members of this legislative body that would play along with that plays right into the hands of the enemy. And I think it's shameful. I do believe we have the votes to defeat it. I certainly hope we do, because we have lots of troops, service members in harm's way right now. And the balance of this thing is hanging there. It's been very effective thus far. It needs to be completed. We don't need Congress getting in the way of that.
More from MAGA Mike here. He's asked by the reporter, is there any indication of like plans? What happens when the war ends, MAGA Mike? Like, can you tell us what the hell is going on? MAGA Mike doesn't know. Let's play this clip.
Is there any indication of plans? Representative Scalise said he heard one. Democrats say they're not hearing one. What happens when the war ends? What does that look like? And then what does the day after look like?
Look, no one can yet determine with any degree of certainty how this will turn out. We have taken out in what appears to be top few layers of leaders and potential leaders who would take over there. It is time for the people of Iran to step up and seize this moment of opportunity for them, the one that they have long awaited, to have freedom there. We're encouraging that. We're hopeful for that. I think our NATO allies and our other allies around the world are watching with great anticipation and hope. I suspect that the entire world will reach out a hand of encouragement and assistance.
If you've been listening to the show for a while, you already know how much I love Sol's out-of-office THC gummies and sparkling beverages, and now they've launched something new, Mood Gummies. Lately, I've been more mindful about how I want to feel, whether I'm socializing, winding down, or just decompressing after a long day. Instead of defaulting to a drink and hoping for the best, I've been reaching for Sol's new Mood Gummies. I've tried the Uplift during the day, 3 milligrams sativa THC plus CBG, and it gives me that bright social boost without the crash. At night, the Mellow Gummies with 3 milligrams of indica THC and CBN help me fully unplug, and the Balance Blend, 3 milligrams of hybrid THC and CBD, is perfect for that easy anytime vibe. Sol is a wellness brand that makes delicious hemp-derived CBD and THC products designed to make feeling good simple. The Mood Gummies have precise dosing, clean ingredients, and formulations designed for predictable effects, so you can choose how you want to feel while staying in control. 3 moods, 3 intentionally crafted formulas, same great taste. Whatever the moment, there's a Sol Mood Gummy to match, and honestly, I don't miss the hangovers, the bad sleep, the extra calories, or the sluggish mornings. This just fits better with my healthier habits. Make today a
That the objective, the mission here, the rationale for it is very clear and very simple. You've heard it articulated over and over and over from the President of the United States, from the Secretary of State, from the Secretary of War, myself, and many others who have said this over and over. I'm not sure why there are lingering questions about this. This is really a very simple matter. It's about the building of ballistic missiles. That's what Iran was engaged in. And they were doing it at a speed and at a scale that was exceeding the ability of our regional allies to respond appropriately. This created an imminent and serious threat.
And also you have Marco Rubio yesterday also flip-flopping or just saying the exact opposite of what he previously said. Here's what he said yesterday. Here's what he said the day before. You can play this clip.
Yesterday, you told us that Israel was going to strike Iran and that's why we needed to get involved. Today, the president said that Iran was going to get
Yeah, your statement is false. So that's not what I was asked very specifically. Were you there yesterday?
Yes, I asked
Okay.
the question.
And so the president made the very wise decision. We knew that there was going to be an Israeli action. We knew that that would precipitate an attack against American forces. And we knew that if we didn't preemptively go after them before they launched those attacks, we would suffer higher casualties and perhaps even higher those killed. And then we would all be here answering questions about why we knew that and didn't act.
You have MAGA Mike Johnson has asked, Additional questions like, what's the purpose of this all? He's like, we have no ability to get into nation building. We're not the world's policeman, but here we need to do it. Play this clip.
Leaders who would take over there. It is time for the people of Iran to step up and seize this moment of opportunity for them, the one that they have long awaited, to have freedom there. We're encouraging that. We're hopeful for that. I think our NATO allies and our other allies around the world are watching with great anticipation and hope. I suspect that the entire world will reach out a hand of encouragement and assistance as is needed to help them. We have no ability to get into the nation building business. We don't do that. We're not the world's policemen. America has enough trouble of our own. But I think this is a great development for the people there to be able to stand on their own 2 feet and seize this moment of opportunity. We're certainly hopeful and prayerful that they will, and that no other innocent people are killed. Iran, by some estimates, murdered tens of thousands of their own citizens just within the last several weeks. Those people are now deceased. They do not have the ability to do that. There's still dangerous folks there, but there's more good people. There's more people who desire to have freedom and liberty, and there are terrorists and tyrants in the world. I'm grateful for that. This is their moment to step up, and I hope they will.
Then Lindsey Graham doesn't even really give a crap. Lindsey Graham is like, well, who cares if it's imminent? Just go to war with everybody. Here's what Lindsey Graham says. Play this clip.
In 1939, out of 35, I don't know if Hitler was an imminent threat, but I wish somebody would have dealt with him. Any regime that embraces a cult of death, that's killed Americans, vows to kill Americans in the future, trying to build a nuclear weapon even after Midnight Hammer, trying to build weapons to hit America is a imminent threat. And it doesn't have to be imminent to me, because you don't want it to be imminent.
Right.
The whole idea is for it not to be imminent, dumbass. You want to prevent it from being imminent.
Senator, let me ask you this, because I find I'm putting this in context, which I know you always do.
Well, it is a war. Let's be clear. And here are the first confirmed fatalities in Trump's illegal war. Captain Cody Kirk, 35 years old. Sergeant First Class Noah Tedgens, 42. Sergeant First Class Nicole Ammer, 39. Sergeant Declan J. Cody. We're going to see a lot more photos like that, sadly. Our heart goes out to their families, of course. And also in Iran, 175 people, we reported on this before, were killed in a elementary school that was blown up by either the United States and Israel or Israel and the United States. And neither the Israeli nor U.S. government has directly addressed the strike on the school, but the U.S. Central Command said on Saturday that it was aware of reports concerning civilian harm and was, quote, looking into them. Thousands in Iran attended a burial of children killed in the bombing of that school. There were students attending classes at the time that the school was destroyed. 175 people were killed in the attack on the girls' elementary school. And here's a handout picture released by the Iranian Foreign Media Department of graves getting dug for the victims of that strike on the elementary school, as further reported by Reuters right there. Let's take a look at what Democratic Senator Ruben Gallego says. He's voting yes on the War Powers Resolution. Play this clip.
Senator, you have called for the Senate to immediately return to session and vote on a War Powers Resolution that could block the use of forces in Iran. How do you see that going down? What do you see the language of that being, and where do you see the votes?
Well, I know I'm going to vote yes. This is an illegal war. The justification for war is not there. It was made up. From some of the things that we're gathering, Iran actually had conceded a lot, to the point where, again, there was no imminent threat of any nuclear capability. Another senator talked about them potentially being able to load a bomb and send a bomb. That is absolutely ludicrous, and not even close to that. And so, the president has not justified at all why we are at war. So for me, it's a very simple vote. It should be everyone's very simple vote.
Here's what Democratic Senator Blumenthal said, that his takeaway was after a briefing that took place yesterday regarding this was a briefing by Marco Rubio and the State Department and Defense Department to senators and members of Congress about the war. Here's what Democratic Senator Blumenthal said occurred in the briefing.
I just want to say
I am more fearful than ever after this briefing that we may be putting boots on the ground and that troops from the United States may be necessary to accomplish objectives that the administration seems to have. But I also am no more clear on what the priorities are going to be of the administration going forward, whether it is destroying the nuclear capacity of Iran or simply the missiles or regime change or stopping terrorist activities. And I think the administration owes it to the American people to have briefings not just for members of Congress but for the American public. Nothing here should have been classified. It should be available to the American people.
Here's what Senator Chris Murphy said happened during the briefing.
This is as serious as it gets. This is war and peace. They told us in that room that there are going to be more Americans that are going to die, that they are not in the short run going to be able to stop these drones that are going to continue to fly into the Middle East. We have to have a debate in the United States Senate on an authorization of military force. It will likely fail. It will likely fail, and we shouldn't be voting to proceed to other pieces of legislation until we get a debate on this deeply unpopular, immoral, and illegal war with Iran.
And here's what Senator Brian Schatz said occurred during that briefing.
There are times when you go into a classified session and you walk out and you have a better understanding about the gravity of the situation and the rationale behind the military action. This is not one of those times. We remain as confused as the American people are. They have had 3 or 4 or 5 justifications for this act of war over the last 4 or 5 days, and nothing in this classified session alleviated that confusion.
I also should note that America conducted military operations in Ecuador yesterday. I know this isn't getting a lot of attention, but the U.S. conducted joint military operations with Ecuador against quote unquote designated terrorist organizations. The U.S. Southern Command said that joint activity with Ecuador was an effort to combat the scourge of narco-terrorism, but did not provide other details about the operation. So we actually are in a war again in Ecuador. And there's the leader of Ecuador, President Daniel Noboa, is a big Trumper. There was the Noboa-Trump meeting at Mar-a-Lago on March 29th, 2025. Trump helped the guy Noboa get elected. And just so you also know about Noboa, Noboa's family runs a big banana company and a big produce company in Ecuador. And there have been lots of accusations that the Noboa family was helping cartels and narco trafficking. Just accusations. Let me be very clear. But these are accusations that are out there helping the narco terrorists ship the cocaine in the bananas that are then moved into the United States and elsewhere. And then Noboas deny it, but there's lots of reporting, and accusations about that. And so my query is Donald Trump helping Noboa and Noboa's family crack down on basically the competing cartels, because we know that Donald Trump actually supports narco trafficking, right? In Honduras, Donald Trump allowed Juan Orlando Hernandez, one of the biggest narco traffickers who worked with Chapo. Donald Trump pardoned the guy and let him out. So it makes sense that Donald Trump would be supporting a guy like Noboa, wealthy family, running this kind of, similar type of Trump regime version of it in Ecuador. The same way Donald Trump helped Juan Orlando Hernandez in over in Honduras. Well, there you have it, folks. We'll keep you posted every step of the way about what happens with this vote. So the War Powers Resolution vote occurs first in the United States Senate. Then it will take place in the House of Representatives. First, it takes place in the Senate on Wednesday. The vote in the House will take place on Thursday. And we'll keep you posted every step of the way of how Congress votes. Let us know what you think. Hit subscribe. Let's get to 7 million. Thanks for watching.
Love this video? Support independent media and unlock exclusive content, ad-free videos, and custom emojis by becoming a paid member of our YouTube channel today. You can also
Iran has been within 2 weeks of a nuclear weapon for as long as I can remember.
But at what point does especially China get more involved in the action?
If that were to happen, we're on the threshold of intercontinental nuclear exchanges. The reason we're in this war is because Israel and its Zionist billionaire supporters in the United States currently control Congress and the president.
How does the United States benefit from this conflict in any manner?
It doesn't.
Folks, as I talk to you right now, World War III might be around the corner. Missiles are flying from different countries, bombs are exploding, people are dying, things are getting serious, and I wanted to talk to somebody that can help us understand what's going on in our world. So on the show, we're having an interview with Colonel Douglas Macgregor. He served in the military for almost 30 years. He's a West Point graduate, and some people have called him one of the most innovative minds in the military today. He is joined by Zoom, so this is just a Zoom call, but I think the information is key. We could have flown to DC and done a podcast-style interview, but right now I think information that is powerful and quick is the best. So tune into this as you're working, going for a run, and learn about what's going on in our world. I'm very concerned about this battle in Iran. I'm very concerned about our alliance with Israel, and I think Colonel Macgregor fills in a lot of gaps and gives us a comprehensive understanding that only someone with almost 30 years of experience in the business can do. Tune in to Douglas Macgregor, but first, a quick word from the sponsor of today's episode. Folks, before we dive in, first a quick word from the sponsor of today's episode, Proof Wallet. Every real man needs a real wallet, and Proof delivers just that. In an age where it feels like everything is made from cheap crap, Proof does the exact opposite. They use genuine leather and aerospace grade metal to craft their wallets. This is a veteran owned company that takes pride in craftsmanship. They have a minimalist design that you can fill up to 25 cards in here without it feeling bulky, and it also comes with RFID blocking technology that helps protect your cards from scammers. What separates Proof from the pack is their customer service. If this wallet gets lost or stolen, they replace it for free. To get one for yourself, visit go.carryproof.com/TommyG and use code TommyG for 20% off your entire order. That's right, use code TommyG for 20% off your entire order. Thank you, and back to the episode.
Colonel, thank you for joining us. I know that you're getting a lot of calls right now. The first thing I want to get into is understanding why we're in this conflict in the first place, from the Trump administration's point of view, and then if it differs from your point of view as well.
Well, listen, people can go and listen to Hegseth and Trump and whatever they have to say. I'm not going to repeat that drivel. I'm going to tell you that the reason we're in this war is because Israel and its Zionist billionaire supporters in the United States currently control Congress and the president. They invested enough money to ensure that everyone on the Hill will support whatever Israel wants. And they invested enough money in Trump that he was able to be elected in 2024. Those are the facts. So we are effectively in this war to remove Iran as an obstacle to Israel's regional hegemony.
Now, if you say that to a congressperson or to someone that's in AIPAC, they're going to say that that is a conspiracy theory.
Well, it's not a theory. It's a fact. All you have to do is look at the 100+ million that have been invested in the Congress by the Zionist billionaires. Because if you just look at what AIPAC says it spends on lobbying, that's about $3 million, which is a modest sum. You have to look at the direct payments that go into political action committees to ensure the candidates are elected. You have to understand that a candidate who says they're not prepared to support whatever Israel wants knows that whoever his opponent is will then be offered the same money regardless of party, as long as he or she supports whatever Israel wants. It's a very simple process. It's worked brilliantly because they've had almost inexhaustible funds to invest. Now, all the nonsense about Israel is the first, or not Israel, but Iran is the leading state sponsor of terrorism, that's all nonsense. If you're looking for an Islamist state that sponsors terrorism, that advocates for the use of force against anyone who is not a Muslim for all intents and purposes, but certainly against Israel, against the United States and Europe, go to Pakistan. Pakistan is a world-renowned incubator of Islamist terrorists. Their madrasas, religious schools, are heavily funded by the Saudis that push this Wahhabist extremist Islam. And they very definitely fall into the category. Of course, Pakistan has nuclear weapons, which suggests that if you want to avoid being disrupted or invaded or attacked by the United States and Israel, you probably ought to invest in nuclear weapons.
Which is what they're
Iran
using.
Iran has made it very clear that they will not build a nuclear weapon. That was declared an impossibility almost 20 years ago by the man who is now dead, the former supreme leader, Ayatollah Khomeini. We decided on the basis of Israeli propaganda and direction to say that we don't believe them and they're lying. You've got to go back and look at Mr. Netanyahu's record as a good example over many, many decades. Iran has been within 2 weeks of a nuclear weapon for as long as I can remember. Iran is a terrorist and wants to kill everyone who is not a Muslim. It's all nonsense. We forget that, for instance, this man, Soleimani, who was the leader of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps back in 2005 and 2006, was instrumental in taking the Shiite population led by the famous mullah, whose name escapes me at this point, out of the fight so that Petraeus could pay off the Sunnis and the Shiites would stop fighting to allow for some measure of stability to put in a government. And that government turned out to be pro-Iranian under Mr. Maliki. People have forgotten that. Then Mr. Soleimani came back into the country to organize the Iraqi Shiite militias to fight against ISIS, whom we declared to be our enemy, and Al-Qaeda, and Al-Nusra, and all these Sunni Islamist organizations. They were allied with us. And Soleimani actually went into Syria with these Shiite militias and liberated Christian and Druze and other towns occupied by Armenians and Georgians and so forth. We murdered him. That was our gratitude for his good work, because Israel wanted him dead, because he was opposing everything Israel wanted to achieve. What I'm trying to tell you is that we've just got lie after lie after lie after lie spewing out of people's mouths. And, you know, I keep telling people, and they listen in Europe, they listen in the Middle East, and they certainly listen in India. If you want to stop Islamist terrorism, the first place you look is Pakistan, not Iran. And I am not advocating war with Pakistan. I'm just trying to expose fiction that people are repeating ad nauseum.
So as it stands right now, it appears 3 different U.S. military bases have been taken out. The Burj Khalifa has gotten hit by a drone or a missile. We've bombed a school in Iran where school children are dead. Apparently, Trump has sunk up to 9 Iranian naval ships. What do you make of the carnage so far, and where do you predict it's going to go?
Well, actually, the Iranians have destroyed 27 bases in the region.
27 now.
27. They actually attacked our air base in Kirlik, Turkey, which has been a key hub for U.S. air power across the entire region for decades. And that is no longer usable. We also need to remember that when we say destroy, it doesn't take much to damage an airstrip or airstrips. In other words, to render many of these bases inoperable is not difficult. Now, the 5th Fleet's base has been utterly and completely destroyed, seriously pulverized by multiple missiles. In many other cases, they've used relatively cheap, inexpensive drones that our air defenses have failed to shoot down. And when I say ours, I'm talking about the air defenses we established in UAE and other Gulf states using Patriot missiles and so forth. Of course, Patriot missile, if you fire it at 2 or 3 drones, is a pretty bad exchange rate, because you're spending millions of dollars to shoot down a couple of $100,000 worth of equipment. But they've managed to also damage all the port facilities that we have historically used, even port facilities in Oman. And we were building a port facility in Oman that was supposed to replace the one we've been using in Dubai. And the reason for that was very understandable. we were looking at the vulnerability of the port facilities, and we needed someplace else where we could reload Tomahawk missiles and strike missiles from the Navy, the whole SM family. Right now, we've lost all of those. And the impact on our logistical infrastructure is huge, because you're talking about having to fall all the way back to ports in India or ports in Europe, because you can't use the ports that are in the Middle East. And then beyond those that have been destroyed or damaged, most of the countries in the Middle East have now turned away from us. And I think that's going to be the future. If I were going to predict the future right now, I think we will be swept completely out of the Middle East by the time this war ends. We will be finished in the region.
Do you predict this being a short-term conflict or something that is going to be long-term and ongoing?
I think this is going to go on for weeks, maybe months. We just don't know. Remember when we started the Kosovo conflict, the bombing campaign, that was supposed to last, as I recollect, 2 to 3 days, maybe a week, 2 weeks at most. Well, it lasted for 78 days. And the bombing campaign did not drive the Serbs out of Kosovo. We sent Strobe Talbot to Moscow, and he cut a deal, as President Trump would say, with the leadership in Moscow that agreed that they would tell the Serbs that they could not provide them with food, fuel, and medicine through the winter. And at that point, Milosevic, who was then the widely demonized leader of Yugoslavia or Serbia, recognized that he had to get the troops out because he didn't want to watch several 100,000 of his countrymen starve or freeze to death in the winter, because we bombed all the energy grids, all the heating plants, and so forth. This time around, you're in a somewhat different position because you have an enemy that is far better armed with much more modern technology than anything we faced in Serbia in 1999. And thus far, the Iranians seem to be doing very, very well. I think their next step is to essentially eliminate all the air and ground facilities in Israel for the Israeli armed forces, and force the Israelis to essentially fight from the ground without having much access to launch aircraft.
Do you think Israel is going to get absolutely pounded over the next few days?
I think it has been already, and it's going to continue nonstop. I'm told that President Trump actually sent a message over the weekend to the Iranians offering them an opportunity to negotiate. And they said not only no, but hell no. And I think they've had it with us, because once again, this latest attack did not begin with us. We need to back up a little bit. I've been saying for months, ever since the 12-day war ended, that this would recommence. In other words, the war between Israel and Iran and us would recommence. I thought it would happen just before Christmas. It didn't. Then it became clear that it was probably going to happen in January. We saw these demonstrations, which were grossly inflated in their importance. We lied about what had happened over there, arguing that tens of thousands had been killed, which is a lot of nonsense, including large numbers of police. Well, ultimately what happened is that they did kill the demonstrators, about 400 policemen, but we know that that happened because the Mossad was on the ground with weapons and passed them out and urged people to shoot them, paid people to shoot them in some cases. And the demonstrations were not about overthrowing the government. They were protests about the sad state of the economy, largely as a consequence of our sanctions. And the government didn't disagree with them and said, we're doing everything we can. And they were negotiating a deal or a loan with China for $1 billion to boost the economy. As it turned out, all the killing made that impossible. But only about 3,000 people were killed. Some were jailed. But what we told was a lie at the time about what was going on. But I think the lie was actually believed in the White House. And I think President Trump actually thought, well, this is the moment we should be prepared to attack. But it was shut down so dramatically, particularly after the Iranians discovered, thanks to Chinese and Russian intelligence, where the 40,000 Starlight terminals were that the Mossad had smuggled into the country for use by their agents and the opposition. Once those were shut down and they eliminated most of the agents or the ringleaders, then it all ended. Right now, the only demonstrations we've seen since that time, and including yesterday, involve millions of people demonstrating support for the government. So I think, it should be pretty clear now that what President Trump expected at the time wasn't real. Now, we heard from Mr. Witkoff quite recently that he, in private with Mr. Trump, concluded that it was very strange to them that the Iranians had not capitulated simply on the basis of assembling all of the American military power. And he said, whoa, why? We thought they were going to submit. You begin to wonder who the hell is really in charge. And I think we know who that is. That's Netanyahu. And Witkoff and friends are all surrogates for Netanyahu. Utterly false assumption about how the Iranians think or how they would behave. Iran will not submit to Israeli Jewish supremacy over the region. They won't do it. They won't submit to it over them. And I think they are now increasingly going to be backed by most of the region. And we are desperate. I think Trump called this inaccurately. I'm not sure what kind of advice he got. I doubt seriously he listened to anybody that told him about the limitations on our missiles, how many we had, how many we could produce to replace the ones we shot, and so forth. And I think he also failed to listen to people that told him what we could do from the sea and what we can't do from the sea. The outcome is now a war that is just dragging on without any end in sight.
Can you go on a little bit more about the miscalculations you suspect this Trump White House has made in this conflict and how that could result?
I'm told that we have something in the neighborhood of 4,000 to 5,000 missiles in the region right now. Many of those are Tomahawk, some are Standard missiles. Against that, you have 250,000 missiles on the Iranian side. There are many different categories, and the numbers are different in each, but the point is, they have vastly more missiles than we do. And remember, they're a continental power. That means they're a land power. Their logistical supply chain is very short. Their manufacturing facilities are all underground, and they're continuing to turn out missiles. They also had the Chinese deliver many hundreds of missiles over the last few weeks. And these missiles are very accurate, very lethal. They're compatible with the launchers that the Iranians have. So I think there was a tendency to brush that aside. I think they thought that the Iranian air and missile defenses would fail completely. Well, actually speaking, they're starting to perform finally better than they have in the past. And I think that that's enough to deter people from entering Iranian airspace. The one area where I'm told that we have actually crossed into Iran, along with the Israelis, is up near Tabriz in the very northwest corner of the country. So the point is, I think we've misjudged. We've misjudged our production capacity, our ability to keep up. We keep forgetting that for every missile that's incoming, you fire 2 or 3 to try and knock it down. We have not kept up with the technological developments that they have achieved in Iran. One of their newer missiles that's had great success deploys a dozen or so decoys. And while the various anti-missile missiles are being fired in Israel or by us, the real missiles that are the real dangerous ones that you want to try and stop penetrate. In other words, they have gamed this very effectively, and their penetrations have been effective. And they've used cheap, inexpensive drones wherever possible, and they've managed to essentially shut down the economy in the United Arab Emirates, shut down Bahrain, shut down Kuwait, shut down Qatar. These are not minor matters, because India does billions and billions and billions of dollars of business through Dubai, through the UAE. 18% of the economy in the United Arab Emirates is tied up with aviation. Right now, no one can land or take off. I mean, I could keep going down the list, and you've seen what's happened with oil. Oil is spiking. Remember, capital always flees conflict and crisis and migrates to stability. We've destroyed stability. We've destroyed confidence in the staying power of the Emirates and I think Saudi Arabia. I'm told just before I came on here that a refinery in Saudi Arabia is on fire. If they start destroying refineries and oil infrastructure, and I think that's what's going to happen, it's going to have a terrible impact. It's going to take years to recover from this. And the Iranians have no incentive, none whatsoever, to believe anything we say. We've lied to them repeatedly. And the way this war started, actually, according to Secretary of State Rubio, he spoke to the so-called Group of Eight yesterday. He apparently said, well, you know, the Israelis got this started, and we decided we'd go ahead and join in. In other words, this was not a carefully coordinated, orchestrated beginning. And what were they able to do? They were able to kill the supreme leader. Well, what happens when you fire a CEO? You get a new one. You know, we need to wake up. This is not a personality cult in Iran. This is a real modern state. They have ample succession procedures in place. One commander replaces another based on the casualties. This is not some backward sultanate in the Middle Ages that you lose the sultan and everyone falls apart. So I think all of the assumptions we made about Iran at this point are wrong. Now the real question is this: what else can we do? Well, one of the things that we're doing is we're trying to persuade the Kurds that control much of Syria and parts of northern Iraq to invade Iran on the ground. We're telling them, if you do this, we will help you build your own state. Now, guess who the source for that information is? It was captured through signal intelligence. The Turks. Now, if you're a Turk, how do you feel about a Kurdish state emerging in the region that aspires to take almost a third of your country? And just a few weeks ago, we had a situation where a group of Kurds, about 400 of them, armed to the teeth, were organized and sent into action to cross the Iranian border by the Israelis, by the Mossad. The Turks informed the Iranians of this, and the Iranians annihilated the 400.
You have to stop that.
So I think what you're going to see now increasingly is greater cooperation between Turkey and Iran. Turkey has the largest army in NATO. Turkey is a modern state with modern armed forces. And the Turks are already very unhappy about what the Israelis
Why does everybody
have done in Syria.
overextend, dude?
The Israelis have taken much of southern
You don't even
Syria
have to
and
go way up
continue
there. All we
push
had to do
towards
is hold
Damascus.
this area.
So I guess what I'm saying is that we are now looking around for other ways to attack Iran. Is that evidence for success with the air and missile strikes? I don't think so.
One thing that I'm very curious about is, so it seems like this is going to have very big ramifications on the world oil market. And two beneficiaries of Iran's oil market is Russia and China. At what point do the bigger superpowers join this fight? I know that China is supplying weapons and planes right now, but at what point does especially China get more involved in the action, do you think?
Well, right now, to compensate for the 2.7 million barrels of oil a day that India receives from the Persian Gulf, the
Behind
Indians
us.
are buying oil from
Behind us
Russia.
on point.
China is buying oil from Russia. Japan is buying oil from Russia. So I think we can say at this point that this is a bonanza financially for Russia. They're making more money
I'm
than they
playing
ever
up
made
the
from
There's
the
a
oil and
daredevil
natural
back
gas
here.
market.
And
They have
Doctor
a new
Strange.
pipeline, straight into China. And they are doubling down to
Just because they can see it don't mean they're going to do anything about it. That's why I always be losing matches. So be
for
playing
at
with dumb
least the
people.
temporary loss of oil and gas from the Persian Gulf, because China gets roughly a third of
No,
all of its
look,
oil
that's
and
why
gas
we're
from the
still in
Persian
play,
Gulf.
right?
However, we should point out that China stored up a great deal of oil and gas. In other words, they have reserves, and they built those
That's why
reserves
you're using
up
Valve, right? You got to stay in the
against
air without
very high
getting into really
probability
any
that this will
combat.
be cut off by us. So I think, at least for the moment, Russia and China
You
are
the one that
fine.
started trash talking.
The rest
I
of
was
us,
just saying there's a
not so
person
good.
in the back. I'm a
Europe
trash
in
talk
particular
right back,
is
dog.
in serious trouble
Sound
because
dumb.
we destroyed the Nord Stream pipeline, and we insisted the Europeans not take oil and natural
you
gas
didn't.
from Russia.
No, you didn't.
So they followed suit. They're not taking
Sitting
oil
over here
and
lying
natural
now,
gas
dog.
from Russia.
You get away.
Now they've lost their access to oil and natural gas from the Middle East. So what do you do in Europe? Well, I guess you wait for the summer You may not be able to do any work at night because you won't have any electricity. You know, look, what I'm trying to illustrate is that everything we have done has been done in a vacuum. We have ignored the interests of our friends and allies. You know, we don't care what happens to the Turks. We don't care what happens to the Indians. We don't care what happens to the Europeans. The only thing we seem to care about is Israel.
How does the United States benefit from this conflict in any manner?
It doesn't. You know, that was my point. If I'm projecting into the future, I think that by the time this is over, we'll be finished in the region. Nobody's going to invite us back in to build bases. Why would you want a base that belongs to the United States inside your country? Did we protect these bases? No, we couldn't. So what's happened to the bases? They're destroyed. What's happened to other facilities on the ground in these various places across the Middle East? They're being destroyed. So I don't see much evidence that we're going to be welcome there much longer. In fact, if you're sitting in Korea right now and you're already fed up with the way we've been treating them, and you want to get us out of your country, but you're too polite to say, please leave, I think the South Koreans are going to look at the situation and decide, look, these Americans haven't been very successful at protecting anybody. They can't protect their own bases. They certainly can't protect the Israelis. So just why do we have the Americans in South Korea? Because we don't expect an attack from North Korea. And right now, South Korea's largest trading partner is China. And the Chinese don't like North Korea. Nobody likes North Korea. You don't buy anything from North Korea. North Korea doesn't build anything to sell to anybody. So what would the Chinese like to do? They would like to see South Korea ultimately take ownership of North Korea. But that's impossible as long as we are on the peninsula. But people say, well, wait a minute, the Chinese want to invade South Korea. No, they don't. Why? Why would they do that? The same thing is true with Taiwan. For God's sakes, they don't want a war over Taiwan. A war with Taiwan would destroy business, destroy the economy. There's no value in seizing control of Taiwan. They've made it very clear the only way that they end up invading Taiwan is if we put missiles and troops on Taiwan. Sound familiar? So, you know, the world has changed. It's 80 years since the end of the Second World War. People are still running around saying, well, if the Iranians get the nuclear bomb, they'll attack us right away. No, they won't. But that's good Israeli Jewish propaganda. That's designed to buttress support for this war to destroy Iran. And remember, what's the war about? Have you looked at the Greater Israel Project? Have you seen the map? The map takes Sinai. It takes part of northern Egypt. It seizes part of Jordan. It seizes most or half of Syria as a minimum, part of Iraq, northern Saudi Arabia. This is what we're fighting for?
So it seems like this is a battle that is supposed to help Israel become a world superpower while depleting the United States, which it doesn't seem like Israel has any objective that align with helping us. It's more so they're using us as a big bully to help do what they want in the neighborhood.
Of course. And since they've got control of Congress, who's to stop them?
So I think it brings up some interesting questions of free speech. I know that Colonel Nathan McCormick was recently let go for saying that he doesn't want to fight for the Israeli death cult and suggesting that the United States is Israel's proxy. There's also rumors that the USS Gerald R. Ford is sabotaging its plumbing because they don't want to fight the war for Israel. I don't know if you have any sources on that.
Don't need to say anything
if a soldier refuses an order because they don't want to die for Israel, what are the ramifications for that soldier?
Well, first, I can't confirm.
Can't heal all of y'all if y'all backing up behind me.
I know about that individual, and he expressed his views, and I don't think he's the Lone Ranger. I think most everyone else.
First off, you better calm down with all that hostility.
Regular Army for 28 years after West Point.
Get healed at all.
Is going to follow order unless you are asked to commit an atrocity.
Keep it simple.
No, here ain't nobody there. Throw the game.
Where do you draw the line?
I bet. Say less.
At least I know
y'all heard him, right?
Program. of
At least
massive
I know you ain't trying.
deportation of
At least I know you
Palestinians
ain't
from
trying.
Gaza or the West Bank. It's off the table. And if I were sitting in the Senate or the House, I would insist that we stop aiding and supporting Israel as long as it pursues those policies. I mean, that's, to me, that just makes sense based upon the things we say we stand for in the United States.
Useless.
But as far as
What
the
you
rest
want,
of it is
what?
concerned, I think it's always important that the soldier in the field,
He said, hit you
sailor,
in the-
airman, or
He said you
Marine,
want to get hit from the back.
feels that he is acting in the interests
Look
of
at
the
the
American
goofball,
people.
dude.
Including which side
It's become
you're on.
increasingly difficult to make that argument.
You'll need a
We made that
top-notch
argument
team to
in
win this
Vietnam,
one.
and it was always a lie.
Show some respect.
We've made the argument in many other settings.
I knew
that
this
it was not
freaking
necessarily
community had
true.
tism,
Now,
but I
in
didn't realize it was this
1990,
bad.
That argument was made.
Obviously,
but
y'all
there
don't
were
understand
limitations on
English,
the
dog.
application of American military power.
Pick up a
And there's
textbook.
That limitation
Pick up a
at the time
dictionary,
was
dog.
we are not marching into Iraq with the goal of changing Iraq and regime change. We simply said we're ejecting the Iraqi military from Kuwait.
As our foes
Now, some of us think that we should have done more than we did, but nonetheless, those were the limitations. And I think that went well. It went rather easily compared with everybody's expectation. But then again, we had generals that hadn't been to war since the 1960s. And they saw Vietnam, and that was a very different setting. Right now, I think most Americans in uniform and out of uniform are looking at this, and they're asking some of these questions. But I don't think the majority are asking them and expecting immediate answers. So I think, sadly, this will have to drag on for some period of time. And if it drags on and we get some number of Americans killed, and by some number, 500 at a shot, 1,000 at a shot, something like that, some mass casualty event, it will be much harder for this administration to make an argument for a long-term strategic conflict.
Do you think that Trump can be impeached for not getting congressional approval to go into this war in the first place?
Well, I think that's possible, but I think that's kind of a joke. It's an exercise in extraordinary hypocrisy. The only time the Democrats stood up and gave a standing ovation to Donald Trump during the State of the Union speech was when he talked about attacking Iran. Gee, I wonder why. Everybody's on the payroll. Everybody's getting their check in the mail. So they all stood up and, yes, let's go get Iran. I mean, that's, sorry about that. It's depressing. So if they do that, it's just an exercise in hypocrisy. They've failed the American people themselves. It's their obligation to exercise their constitutional duty. They haven't done it.
If you were to hear from the Department of War, our Navy is the strongest, most powerful, most tremendous. What do you think is the true state of the U.S. Navy right now? And how do we stand to fight in this war?
Well, we have 3 more carrier battle groups. And as I understand it, they are being prepared to surge to the Middle East. If they do, they will not all be at full strength, and they will not all be adequately prepared. Now, I think we have 11 carriers. We have 2 carrier battle groups right now, one in the Mediterranean and one down in the Indian Ocean. These other 3, I don't know where they are precisely. But I think the point is the Navy is not in good shape. And that has been a problem for some time because the admirals refuse to let go of the Cold War paradigm. We keep ships at sea long, long beyond the limits that are normal and are necessary. We patrol seas and oceans where there is nothing. We don't need to be there. We have satellite-based overhead intelligence, terrestrial intelligence, reconnaissance, and surveillance. We don't need to be everywhere as we have been in the past. And as a result, you have a Navy that's worn out.
We'll be back into it.
The equipment is worn out, and people in many cases are not adequately trained. They haven't had time to train. So I think there are serious problems, morale, training, and discipline in the Navy. Now, how about the rest of the force? It's a mixed picture. I think the Air Force probably has the least difficulties, but that has to do with their lifestyle and the way they operate. Whereas the Army and the Marines, I think they have their share of problems as well. Now, we have had recruiting difficulties, in large part because people were tired of rotating in and out of these forward operating bases where they saw no particular mission. So I think there are a lot of problems, and we keep pretending that we are so, I listened to President Trump say, well, I rebuilt it during the last administration, and now our military is greater than ever. He doesn't have any idea. Trump is a marketing genius. He got where he did in business because he was very good at persuading people, to invest in him, to believe him. He's carried that over into politics, but the substance is lacking. Things are not quite as he describes them.
Colonel, you even wrote books on the subject of how the military can innovate. People have called you one of the most innovative thinkers of how the military could change. What would you prescribe for the country right now? If you became benevolent dictator, how would you handle Iran, and what would you do with our military?
Well, the first thing is I wouldn't have attacked Iran. I think it's a very stupid idea. It's always a dumb idea for a maritime or aerospace power, or in our case, we're both a maritime and aerospace power, to attack a land power, or what we call a continental power. Why? Continental powers are very large. They have strategic depth. In other words, they can fall back into their interior. They're harder to reach, especially when they have large populations. 93 million is a large population. And they have a very large pool of young men who can serve in the Iranian armed forces. That's helpful. The Turks do as well. In fact, I think both Iran and Turkey, 50 or 60% of the population is under the age of 30. That's a very fortuitous position to be in militarily. So, what are we really? We're very much like the British Empire before 1914. We sail in or we fly in, and when things go our way, we stay and try to exploit the opportunity for money. When things don't go our way, we sail home. We fly home. We stayed in Vietnam until it became impossible for us to stay there. What did we do? We sailed away, we flew away. We don't live in the Eastern Hemisphere. We don't live on the Asian continent. We don't live in Europe. We don't live in Africa. We don't live in Latin America. So, whatever we do is temporary. It's not an enduring impact. What we do is we disturb the dynamic for some period of time, we try to profit from it, and then we leave. This is the problem, though, in the modern world. That old model of profiting, which was really a form of imperialism, doesn't work. And it's a loser, especially if you're trying to hold territory. My point is this. We need to leave the world to its own devices. We need to focus here at home. We need to treat the rest of the world not as an enemy, just as a normal person would treat another normal person. But we should also look at states as potential strategic partners depending on circumstances. I like to call relations between nations limited liability partnerships. You cooperate together when it makes sense to do so. But you don't set up alliances that are supposed to be permanent, that bind small states to us or bind us to them. In other words, work together when you can, but it doesn't necessarily mean that our interests align perfectly. One of the major crusades of the Israeli state and its supporters in the United States has been to create the illusion that whatever Israel's interests are and whomever Israel fights is somehow or another our enemy, and it's in our interest to be part of it. That's not true. We don't really have an interest in war with Iran. We never have. And if you go back, and we need to pause and discuss this for just a minute. If you go back to Sam Huntington's work on Clash of Civilizations and some of his other works before that, Political Order in Changing Societies. Pardon me, I used to teach this stuff at West Point. one of the points that he made repeatedly was of all the Islamic states in the world, Iran was by far the most enlightened, the most advanced, with the highest human capital, and most likely to become part of the growing modern world. That is still true today. But this propaganda machine over the last 30 years has worked overtime to convince everyone in the United States who watches Fox News or CNN or ABC or MSNBC or NBC or whatever, and the 6 oligarchs, Zionist billionaires who control all the media corporations, have tried repeatedly to reinforce this enemy picture or perception of Iran. It's worked. We're finally at war with Iran. And we got a problem. First of all, we don't really think we can win it, contrary to whatever Donald Trump says publicly. Secondly, we don't know how to end it. Especially if ending it means we have to admit that we can't win.
How do you think this goes for Israel in the sense that maybe they're a little bit in over their head? They have this mentality that it's us versus the world. Everyone wants us wiped out. We're willing to use the ultimate force, a nuclear weapon. Could this get escalated into something extremely serious?
Yes, that is the greatest danger of all. I think the Russians and the Chinese will stay on the sidelines for the moment. But as it becomes clear that we can't win and the Iranians can't lose, they will become more engaged, probably with us. Initially behind closed doors, and then more so publicly if it becomes necessary. The Israelis, fearing exactly this development, may well decide to use a nuclear weapon in order to stop the Iranians from flattening their country with missiles. Because what they don't want to do is admit defeat. So then in desperation, turn to a nuclear weapon. If that were to happen, we're on the threshold of intercontinental nuclear exchanges. We don't know where it'll go. We don't know how bad it can get. I hope that President Trump has given some thought to this possibility, because he, more than anyone else, would have to personally intervene to stop it.
So essentially, unless we sort of divorce ourselves from this Israel cult thinking, things will not be good for us going forward in the future.
Well, you can't divorce yourself at the moment. We're in too deep. But the most that you can do is turn to the Israelis and say stop when the time comes. And that won't be for a little while. I think we have 10 days to 2 weeks of missiles. That's it.
What comes next? Oh, as far as what we have left in our arsenal.
Yeah, and the Israelis have less than that.
And what happens after that?
Well, that's the question. Do you finally admit this is a loss? Do you admit that you can't win? Do you turn to Moscow or Beijing or both and ask them to mediate? Better would be to turn to India. India is neutral, and India has good relations with Iran historically. It's also had good relations with Israel and us and Russia, and it has its moments with China, but not to the point where it's hopelessly hostile. Maybe India could mediate some sort of end to this disaster. But it's too soon. We're going to push this to the nth degree. It'll be pushed to as far as we can go before we stop. And then your other scenario will come into play, by the way. And that is Congress will suddenly say, this is a disaster, Donald Trump. It's all of your making. And in reality, they were as deeply involved in bringing on this war as anyone. Then the American people are going to decide whether or not they think they have a legitimate government anymore. Since the polling was 70 to 85% against the war. And if we had put this to a referendum, I doubt seriously we would be at war right now.
Colonel, I know you're probably booked all day doing hits like this. I very much appreciate your time. I'm looking forward to our Pentagon piece coming out. So thank you for joining us. One request, if you could keep the link open once we hang up this call. So
yeah, sure, absolutely. The other thing is, I urge people to go to my Substack, McGregor Warrior Substack, and I've got a piece there. It's really about how long will this last and how will it end. It'll go into greater detail than we were able to in the short time we were talking. Okay?
Yes, and you'll have a link to your latest book in the description as well.
Okay.
We appreciate your time, and we will be in touch, okay?
Super. Thanks very much.
Take.
You keep your eyes open. I'll keep mine. Right.
Trump's war in Iran, it's accelerating, and what he himself called the worst case scenario, it may already be happening. The next supreme leader could be just as bad as the last one, except this time, his wife, his mom, and his son were all killed in American strikes. Right, and that is the death toll in Iran may have passed 1,006 American troops are dead, and this morning you had Pete Hegseth going on camera to promise more and larger waves of attacks and describing death and destruction from the sky all day long with the enthusiasm as someone who's never been on the receiving end of it. But this morning, Hegseth made it clear, this is ramping up, not winding down. He said the assault on Iran is accelerating, not decelerating, that more bombers and more fighters are arriving in the region today, and that additional American casualties are an expected and acceptable cost. You also had General Dan Kane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, reporting that Iran's ballistic missile strikes are down 86% from day one, and drone strikes are down 73%. And so with that, you had Hegseth claiming that the U.S. and Israel will soon have complete control of Iranian skies.
I hope all the folks watching understand what uncontested airspace and complete control means. It means we will fly all day, all night, day and night, finding, fixing, and finishing the missiles and defense industrial base of the Iranian military. And Iran will be able to do nothing about it. B-2s, B-52s, B-1s, Predator drones, fighters, controlling the skies, picking targets. Death and destruction from the sky, all day long.
He then highlighted specific operations, revealing that the U.S. sank an Iranian naval ship with a crew of 180 off the coast of Sri Lanka using a submarine-launched torpedo, which is the first time an American submarine's actually been used to fire a torpedo against an enemy ship in combat since World War II. And you had Sri Lankan officials initially reporting the incident without a known cause, saying that 30 people were rescued with a search underway for survivors. He also said that the leader of the Iranian covert unit that planned to assassinate Trump back in 2024 was killed in the strikes, and he praised yesterday's hit on a building associated with the Assembly of Experts.
Iran's senior leaders are dead. The so-called governing council that might have selected a successor, dead, missing, or cowering in bunkers, too terrified to even occupy the same room.
But here's also the problem, or a potential problem. You had the Iranian media downplaying the assembly strike, which isn't the most unexpected, but whatever is left of the council, they're apparently still moving ahead with choosing a new supreme leader. And with that, you had Trump saying that the worst case scenario would be a successor as bad as the previous person. And while there's been no official announcement yet, at least as of recording, it's looking increasingly likely that their pick will be the former supreme leader's own son, a reported hardliner who's believed to be favored by top Revolutionary Guard officials. And what I said at the beginning, that's not a hypothetical. He didn't lose just his father in Saturday's strikes. He reportedly lost his wife, his mother, and his son as well. And so you have many experts guessing that this is not going to be the subservient figurehead that the White House was hoping for. But with that, you had Israel's defense minister already vowing that if the next supreme leader follows the same ideology, he'll become an unequivocal target for elimination. Also, you had Hegseth downplaying reports that munition stockpiles were running low, arguing that air dominance means that the military can rely on conventional bombs rather than its most advanced and limited weapons. Hegseth saying they'll be using 500-pound, 1,000-pound, 2,000-pound precision and unguided bombs, of which we have a nearly unlimited stockpile. And that echoes Trump, who posted this week that the U.S. has a virtually unlimited supply of these weapons, and adding, wars can be fought forever and very successfully using just these supplies. But in addition to people being freaked out about the president talking about forever wars, there are also real concerns about the pace that the United States is burning through its stockpile. And with that, you've got the Trump administration meeting with defense contractors at the White House on Friday to discuss ramping up production. And there's reportedly talk of invoking the Defense Production Act to force companies to prioritize manufacturing the munitions that the military needs most. Also, regarding a connected situation on the girls' school strike that killed at least 175 people on Saturday, you had Hegseth continuing to deny responsibility.
All I can say is that we're investigating that. We, of course, never target civilian targets.
Now, with that, I do want to note that with the difficulty of getting information out of Iran, there is currently no undeniable proof of who is responsible. But you have many, including experts, saying the probability is there, and the administration's credibility on civilian casualties, it's thin, and it's getting thinner with every death and destruction from the sky all day long soundbite. And then as far as Israel specifically, they've been hitting Tehran hard today, including shooting down a manned Iranian warplane over the capital, reportedly a first for this conflict. Also, the intensity of the strikes led to Iran postponing a ceremony on honoring the former supreme leader. And then outside of the capital, reportedly, the Israeli military targeted command centers of Iran's state paramilitary forces, the ones involved in deadly protest crackdowns. And that notably follows earlier strikes on police stations, detention centers, and intelligence offices tied to internal security. And as we talked about yesterday, this appears aimed at weakening the regime's ability to suppress its own population, and they're encouraging Iranians to rise up. And in the meantime, it's the Kurdish groups that remain the most likely to act. Several exiled Kurdish militant groups based in Iraq, they've said that they were preparing to enter Iran, and there are reports that they may be talking to or working with the CIA and the US government. And you also have an Israeli outlet today reporting that thousands of fighters have now actually launched a ground offensive. And so actually Iran, they responded by targeting those groups' bases in Iraq with its latest strikes. So the Iranian attacks today, they also targeted Israel, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, and Kuwait. And actually the war, it's threatening to pull in new players. Right, Pakistan, they warned Iran that it has a mutual defense pact with Saudi Arabia, telling Iranian leadership to keep that in mind. Whether Pakistan's actually ready to enter a conflict with Iran, that's a whole other question, especially since it's already a week into heavy fighting with Afghanistan, which is then a whole other situation that we don't even have time to cover today. Right, and then you've got Turkey, a NATO member, sharing a 300-mile border with Iran, which revealed today that its air defenses shot down a ballistic missile that was heading towards its airspace. And that's really a huge one, because a confirmed attack on NATO territory could trigger the alliance's mutual defense clause and drag 32 member states into this war. Now, the missile's intended target, that's unclear right now, but there is a Turkish airbase that hosts US troops. And as far as Turkey, for now, they said that it will not allow its airspace to be used for attacks on Iran. Right, on that note, the use of foreign bases, it's becoming a real issue for Trump. Spain denied the use of its military bases to US forces involved in attacking Iran. Though that's also not the most surprising, given that Spain's been the most vocal major European country in opposing the Trump administration, including on immigration, Gaza, and the rest of Venezuelan President Maduro. And as far as Trump there, he responded by threatening to cut off all trade with Spain and suggesting he might use the base anyway, saying we could use the base if we want. We could just fly in and use it. With Israel's foreign minister also accusing Spain of standing with all the tyrants of the world. Trump then also slammed British Prime Minister Keir Starmer for waiting until Sunday to grant the US limited access to UK bases, and only for the, quote, specific and limited defense purpose of destroying Iran's missiles. Or with Starmer saying that the UK had learned lessons from the mistakes of Iraq, was not involved in the initial strikes, and will not join offensive action now. With the UK publishing a legal justification for its limited involvement, but still they haven't explicitly said whether it considers the US-Israeli strikes legal. And as far as France's Macron, he ordered his country's sole operating aircraft carrier to the Mediterranean for defensive purposes. So more guns in the neighborhood, technically for defense. And also, while this military buildup is accelerating, you've got hundreds of thousands of people from the West that are trying to get out of the region. And you've definitely had many allied governments moving way faster than the United States in announcing evacuation plans despite having little advance warning of the strikes. And on Monday, after Trump attacked Iran, the State Department urged Americans to leave more than a dozen Middle Eastern countries using available commercial transportation. Though two problems there, they didn't announce any plans to help, and most commercial air travel from the region had been stopped. And so you saw people like retired Major General Randy Manner, former Deputy Commanding General of the 3rd U.S. Army in Kuwait, getting stranded in the UAE and telling the New York Times, it is the epitome of absurdity. Leave the country, but yet the airspace is closed? This is nothing less than a total failure of the U.S. government to provide the expected assistance to American civilians who are caught in harm's way. Though yesterday, you had the State Department finally saying that it was facilitating charter flights from the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Jordan. Even Trump posting that more than 9,000 Americans have safely returned home and urged remaining citizens to register with the State Department and claiming, we are already chartering flights free of charge and booking commercial options, which we expect will become increasingly available as time goes on. And then, of course, on Monday, you had Secretary of State Marco Rubio giving what might be the most self-defeating explanation for a war in modern American history. Because his claim was there was an imminent threat because we knew that if Iran was attacked, and we believed they would be attacked, that they would immediately come after us. And so if you think about what he's actually saying there, and you look at a lot of things, it appears that maybe the reason they believed Iran would be attacked is because they were helping Israel plan the attack. And so either he's admitting that a foreign leader dictated U.S. foreign policy, or he's saying that the United States just couldn't stop Israel from acting, which, as we've discussed, doesn't hold up. Israel has openly said that it coordinated with the United States for months and it wouldn't have moved without Trump's approval. And all of that, as you have Trump himself saying that he may have actually forced Israel's hand, not the other way around. But then it also gets worse because Rubio walked back that rationale and pivoted to Iran's growing weapons arsenal being the real danger. And then you had Trump sending a letter to Congress offering a completely different explanation, saying there was no imminent threat, and instead the objective was to neutralize Iran's malign activities and advance national interests, including ensuring the free flow of maritime commerce through the Strait of Hormuz. Except the only reason the strait's on lockdown and oil prices are surging is because of what's happening now. And then also in the same letter, Trump circled back to Rubio's original rationale, saying that they attacked because Israel was prepared to strike with or without the United States, and Iranian counterattacks would target American troops. So to recap, The Secretary of State says that Israel forced their hand. The president says no, he actually forced Israel's hand. The president's letter to Congress says there was no imminent threat. The Secretary of State says there actually was, and both have offered at least 3 separate justifications that contradict one another. And while there's a lot that tells you a lot, the fact that they cannot pick just one and stick with it, it tells you everything. And all the while, you've got congressional Republicans doing their best to stay in lockstep, but also the ground keeps shifting under them. You had House Speaker Mike Johnson tracking Rubio's evolution from Israel gave us no choice to the ballistic missiles, but then seemed to land on just blaming Islam.
They wanted to wipe Israel off the face of the earth, and they'd like to take us out as well. We're the great Satan in their analogy and their misguided religion, and there was no way to appease them.
He then suggested that Iran was pushing ahead with nuclear ambitions with the explicit aim of killing its enemies, which isn't supported by U.S. intelligence findings. Oh, and he also accused Iran of stalling during the Geneva talks.
They were stalling because they wanted to kill us.
The side that actually ended negotiations by killing people appears to be the United States and Israel. You know, one of the other things to note here is this is at least the 3rd time that Trump has deployed heavy force against a country that he was actively negotiating with. So that's why you have experts saying that the long-term damage to U.S. diplomatic credibility, it could be huge. With one telling the New York Times, this is basically abusing diplomacy to cover up a military operation. And then warning that in the future, countries may think twice about re-engaging if you're faced with this kind of bad faith behavior. And then on top of that, you had a senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations putting the nuclear implications bluntly, saying the deterrent value of the bomb is now more obvious. Everyone in the Iranian leadership recognizes that if they had the bomb, they wouldn't be getting bombed. And you know, it's not just Iran here. You have experts pointing to Kim Jong-un, saying that North Korea now has even more reason to accelerate its own capabilities. And the message that this sends to every country watching, it's simple. If you do not have nuclear weapons, you are vulnerable. If you do, you're untouchable. But if Kim Jong-un didn't have his nuclear deterrent, I don't know if he and Trump would be sharing love letters to one another. You know, it changes the relationship. But also, you know, despite the contradictions, the death toll, the economic fallout, the diplomatic damage, and despite most Americans disapproving of this war, there's seemingly nothing that's going to stop it, at least yet. Because today, you have the Senate expected to vote down a war powers resolution that's aimed at ending the conflict, with most Republicans, along with Senator John Fetterman, expected to vote against it. And so for now, the bombs keep falling, the justifications keep changing, and nobody in a position to stop this seems willing to do it. And well, of course, I want to know your thoughts and reactions to everything that we're talking about here. In addition to that, I'd also love to know your predictions here. In 1, 3, 12 months from now, do you think Iran's doing better, worse, the same? Right? Or maybe more generally, how do you think this plays out, at least in part? And then there's more we're going to dive into in just a minute, but first let me thank a sponsor and say, you know, spring's around the corner and the events are ramping up. We've got basketball tours for Bruno Mars, Lady Gaga, BTS, Zach Bryan, Cardi B, Chris Stapleton, and more. And we've been giving out $500 every week for over a year thanks to our sponsor over at SeatGeek. And somehow, some of y'all still haven't entered for free. Right? And it's been awesome seeing so many of you beautiful bastards win the $500 SeatGeek weekly giveaway and use it to hit up concerts, games, Broadway shows, just y'all living your best lives. And if you haven't used it and if you haven't entered yet, it takes 2 seconds and next week's $500 winner could be you. Because SeatGeek is the #1 rated ticketing app with over 28 million downloads and 10 that's out there. This dealing with their own fractures, and in Texas, redrawn. And the chaos got so bad, you had a judge ordering for the polls to stay open an extra 2 hours. But there's a lot we need to break down here. Because these primaries, they set the stage for the midterms. And the anxiety, it was real on both sides.
If we lose the midterms and we lose 2028, some in this room are going to prison, myself included.
Republican voter morale's dipped as the president has led the country into war while also trying to distance himself from the Epstein files. But also, voters aren't completely sure the Democrats have the strength to capitalize either, with growing internal divisions over multiple issues. And one of the biggest questions heading into primary season has been whether aging incumbents can hold their ground against a younger generation of challengers. And so starting with the Senate races, and specifically the straightforward ones. In Arkansas, Republican Senator Tom Cotton will face Democratic challenger Hallie Schaffner. In North Carolina, former Governor Roy Cooper, a popular moderate who pulled 92% of the primary vote, will be opposed by Michael Whatley, who's already been endorsed by Trump.
And I want to thank President Donald J. Trump for his strong and unwavering support in this race.
But Texas, it was definitely the main event. And on the Republican side, you had Senator John Cornyn and Attorney General Ken Paxton heading to a runoff after Representative Wesley Hunt split the field. And while both are actually in Trump's good graces, neither got an official endorsement before yesterday's race started, which could have actually worked in their favor, with Texas Republicans having largely stuck by the president, even as national support has softened. But also today, as of recording, we're seeing reports showing that Trump is expected to endorse Cornyn in the runoff race. And the dynamic between these two, if you haven't seen it, it's very clear. Cornyn says that Paxton is a liability because of his legal troubles and controversies.
Texas Republican primary voters will hear more about my record of delivering conservative victories in the United States Senate and learn more about Ken's indefensible personal behavior and failures in office.
And while Cornyn, I'll say, he's had more of an up and down relationship with Trump. Right? His willingness at times to work with the Democrats and his occasional criticism of the president, it's led to Trump calling him a rhino. So, something to consider there as we wait to see how this plays out. But the runoff, it's set for May 26th. Right? But the Democratic primary there, it was arguably the most heated race of the night. And there you saw State Representative James Tallarico defeating second-term Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. And it was a messy one. Right? By most measures, Tallarico ran an effective campaign that reached beyond the traditional Democratic base, something that the party's been trying to figure out for years. Right? And that, well, Crockett brought a different kind of energy. She is a second-term congresswoman who built a national profile by being blunt and confrontational in moments where other politicians maybe hedge their bets.
Somebody's bleach blonde, bad-built butch body, that would not be engaging in personalities, correct?
If you could speak directly to Elon Musk, what would you say?
Off.
Right, and Crockett's been a vocal advocate for black and brown communities in Texas, which actually has the highest black population in any state. But also, you had both candidates dealing with different controversies. You had Tallarico facing backlash after allegations that he referred to a former Texas Representative Colin Allred as a mediocre black man in a private conversation. You had Tallarico denying that, saying he would never say that. He was saying that Allred, the way that he campaigned, was mediocre. And then Crockett faced accusations online that she was a Zionist with unclear positions on Israel's relationship with the White House, though she said that those allegations were unsubstantiated. But, one of the things that a lot of people came back to is saying that racial dynamics were an undercurrent throughout the race. And with that, you saw Crockett pointing to what she described as dog whistles, including her deeper political experience being overlooked, and ads from Tallarico's camp that she said darkened her skin tone.
We've all seen the attack ads that have come on behalf of my primary opponent, the ads that are darkening my skin, and this continual kind of, if she wins, we lose. It's not even undertones right now. It is straight up racist.
Now, whether race was a deciding factor in the outcome, that's going to be something that people debate, but I will say that it was clearly part of the conversation throughout. But then also, we need to talk about what happened at the actual polls, because that was something that affected voters across the board. You had many Texas voters being turned away from locations that they had been voting at for years. And the highest number of reported cases, it came out of Dallas County, but Williamson County, north of Austin, they saw similar problems. You had voters arriving at their usual spots only to be told that they had to go to different precinct locations. And this happened because Texas congressional districts were remapped and new precinct lines were finalized in December, leaving almost no time to inform voters.
Dallas County should have the second largest voter participation of any county in this state.
And on top of that, Texas previously used a system where people could vote anywhere in their home county. And so there was so much confusion that it crashed the county election office's website, with then a Dallas County judge ordering polls to stay open 2 extra hours. But with some voters having walked miles to their original locations only to be redirected, there were real questions about whether that was actually enough.
Every vote must be counted. Every voice must be heard. The voter suppression in my home county and in Congresswoman Crockett's home county underscores the gravity of this moment.
There was a lot of confusion today. We're about to file a lawsuit to keep the voting polls open. We were able to keep the polls open, but I can tell you now that people have been disenfranchised.
Or with both candidates there acknowledging the problem, and it was a very real failure that affected real voters regardless of who they were there to support. And so with all this, you have Crockett's camp saying that they were preparing a lawsuit, especially after a conflicting court directive complicated the extended hours.
The Supreme Court also said that they are to separate any votes out that came in after 7 p.m.
Crockett has also since conceded, citing the need for party unity heading into the midterms. And so, with all of this, there is the question, okay, why did yesterday matter? What does it tell us? Well, first up, voter suppression's alive and well. Or we saw it in Texas yesterday, and we'll probably see it again across the country between redrawn maps, mail-in ballot fights, disappearing polling locations, and unrealistic wait times. And while mistakes happen, and we need to be aware of that, they don't happen this often and this consistently in the same direction. This is seeming more like a feature, not a glitch. Then second up, primary turnout, it's a preview of midterm energy. But if excitement and party loyalty is strong enough to bring people out in the primaries, those same voters will likely show up in November and in 2028. And third up, Trump's influence is still the dominant variable on the Republican side. But in Texas, anything short of an official endorsement meant that voters defaulted to whoever aligned with the president most closely on the issues that mattered most to them. Dan Crenshaw, the only House Republican in Texas running for re-election without Trump's endorsement and someone known for occasionally breaking from the party, he may have lost a seat because of it. And then finally, looking at the situation and exit polls, affordability appears to be cutting through everything. It was a major factor in Texas yesterday, and it's not the only place where that issue is driving votes. And so both parties, they're going to have to reckon with a lot, but that also includes the fact that voters care about what they can afford more than almost anything else. Right? And while you had people out there voting for the futures they want to see, and other news, Mamdani, he's continuing his sprint for change. New York City just took its first step toward free universal childcare, and if it works, it could save families tens of thousands of dollars a year. It's part of the reason it's being being called the most ambitious expansion of the social safety net in decades. But also, there are real questions about whether the money is actually there to see it through. And so with that, to get into the specifics, Mayor Zohran Mamdani and Governor Kathy Hochul, they announced that starting this fall, 4 communities across the city will launch a new program called 2K, offering 2,000 free childcare slots for 2-year-olds. The seats will be distributed across Upper Manhattan, the Bronx, Southeast Queens, and Central and Eastern Brooklyn, covering every borough except Staten Island. Or is it somehow Pete Davidson's fault? We'll get there, because this is the first phase of Mamdani's broader plan to extend the city's existing 3K and pre-K programs to reach younger kids. You also have Hochul's office saying that around 12,000 seats will be available across all 5 boroughs by fall of 2027, with the goal of eventually reaching every 2-year-old in the city. Advocates predict about 55,000 kids will use the program once it's fully established. And once fully implemented, the program will provide free childcare to any family who needs it, regardless of zip code, income, or immigration status. Now, as far as why these specific neighborhoods, you had officials saying that the initial communities were chosen based on economic need, demand for childcare, and existing access gaps. But also, a major factor was whether local providers had the capacity and infrastructure to actually launch the program sustainably. These selected areas, they're mostly low income, but they include pockets of gentrification, and that's intentional. And officials explained 2 reasons. First, some of the highest need neighborhoods didn't have enough existing childcare infrastructure to support an early rollout. And second, they want to make clear from the start that this is universal childcare for all families, not just a poverty program. But with all this, you had Staten Island leaders slamming their exclusion, or with one city council member arguing that universal childcare must mean universal, though you had city officials pushing back, saying that Staten Island will be included next year and the state had to be selective in the early stages. So then here is where it really gets complicated. The money. Hochul has committed $73 million for the first year and around $425 million for the second. But beyond that, there isn't a plan yet. Now, she did imply that she's committed to long-term funding, but she hasn't provided specifics. And then even if the money does come through, there are worries that there are structural problems. Childcare workers earn low wages and retention's brutal. Also, scaling this up means negotiating with multiple unions over pay, finding and training a massive number of new employees, and building out centers that don't exist yet. But this is going to be very interesting and important to watch because the need here is undeniable. And if you're a parent, you know this, but for everyone else, childcare costs have outpaced inflation nationwide. And in New York specifically, center-based care for infants and toddlers, it averages $26,000 a year, which is a 43% increase since 2019. Free 2K, it genuinely has the potential to be life-changing, not just for the parents' wallets, but for workforce participation, early childhood development, and economic mobility across the city. But, and it's that big old but, potential and execution are 2 very different things. The biggest social safety net expansion in decades, it doesn't mean anything if it runs out of funding in year 3. And so these next couple of years, it's going to tell us whether this is a very real shift or a promising pilot that just couldn't scale. And then there's even more we've got to dive into in just a minute, but first let me thank a sponsor and say, remember when online scams could mostly be avoided by just not clicking on shady links or opening the wrong email? Because, well, yay, it's 2026 and you have criminals now using AI to clone people's voices from snippets of audio to trick banks and financial institutions into authorizing unauthorized payments and direct debits. This is the type of scam that, turns something as personal as your voice into a tool for fraud, making it harder for consumers to spot deception and potentially leading to financial loss, even when you think you're talking to a trusted contact. In a world where scammers can mimic your voice and bypass traditional trust cues, it makes me thankful that NordVPN's encrypted connections and threat blocking tools, it helps keep your sensitive communications and data safe from interception and manipulation. All your internet traffic, it stays encrypted, meaning that your data is yours, even if the website that you're using is held together with duct tape and hope. Plus, NordVPN has a strict no logs policy. They're not tracking you, storing you, or selling you. They protect you, period. I'm personally protected, and you should be too. Right now, you can get an exclusive discount on a 2-year plan, plus 4 extra months free when you use my link. And it's all risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. Just scan the code or go to nordvpn.com/Phil. That's nordvpn.com/Phil. But then, diving right back into the news, so much to talk about here. Howard Lutnick just volunteered to testify about Jeffrey Epstein before anyone could subpoena him. There's now a push to subpoena Trump's own Attorney General, Pam Bondi, over the DOJ's handling of the files. And Bill Gates, Leon Black, and Goldman Sachs' general counsel, they've all been called. But starting with Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, he's been under enormous pressure to face the House Oversight Committee over his ties to Epstein. And it eventually got to the point yesterday where he volunteered, telling Axios, "I look forward to appearing before the committee. I have done nothing wrong, and I want to set the record straight." And the interview is going to be held behind closed doors with a transcript to follow. And with this, you had committee chairman James Comer commending Lutnick for what he called his demonstrated commitment to transparency and his willingness to engage with the committee. Though regarding that, and also why this testimony matters, is last year you had Lutnick claiming that he only visited Epstein at his New York home once and had no real relationship with him.
I was never in the room with him socially, for business, or for even philanthropy. If that guy was there, I wasn't going because he's Gross.
But the Epstein files show a very different story. They show the two communicated over the span of a decade, including after Epstein was convicted of sex crimes. And in fact, he visited Epstein's Island in 2012 and is photographed with him there. So the committee, or at least some of the people on that committee, they're almost certainly going to be pressing him on why his public statements don't match the record. But Lutnick, he's not the only target. During a hearing this morning, you had Representative Nancy Mace making a motion to subpoena Trump's own Attorney General Pam Bondi.
Chairman, I move that the committee issue a subpoena to the Honorable Pamela Jo Bondi to appear before the committee for a deposition regarding the department's handling of the investigation to Jeffrey Epstein and his associates.
And this is coming as you have reports repeatedly alleging that the DOJ has been removing Epstein files with tens of thousands taken down for review, including files containing allegations against Trump. You had Representative Ro Khanna backing the motion, posting that the afternoon vote would determine whether to stand with survivors or the Epstein class. And then actually, just as I was wrapping up today's show, Khanna announced that the motion to subpoena Bondi actually passed by a vote of 24-19, with 5 Republicans joining Democrats here. So you have outlets like the New York Times emphasizing that this is really a striking rebuke to see Republicans compel a member of the Trump administration to testify. But then it also doesn't stop with just Lutnick and Bondi, because Comer's now announced that he has asked a long list of other major names to testify, including Microsoft founder Bill Gates, Goldman Sachs' general counsel Kaplan Rumler, billionaire Leon Black, and 4 others, with each receiving a letter stating the committee believes you have information that will assist in its investigation. Now, Gates, he's denied wrongdoing, but he recently apologized to staff at his foundation for ever associating with Epstein. And there you had a spokesperson saying that he welcomes the opportunity to answer questions. And then with Rumler, who's resigning from Goldman Sachs over her Epstein ties, she said that she knew of no crimes but is happy to cooperate. And Leon Black, who is one of Epstein's biggest financial clients and a major source of income for him, issued a similar statement. And again, all of these interviews are going to be held behind closed doors and transcribed. But also, you have lawmakers like Mace arguing that the list needs to be much, much longer, pushing for people including Woody Allen, Peter Attia, Steve Bannon, and Harvey Weinstein. But with all that, if you're like, why does it sound like a name is missing? Yeah, Donald Trump isn't being named here. He is the one person that Democrats are most focused on getting in that chair. And so far, the one person that Republicans have shown zero interest in calling. And so, it's worth noting that the Epstein investigation is widening faster than really at any point since the files were released. Lutnick is testifying, Bondi just got subpoenaed, Gates, Black, and Rumler, they've all been called, and the DOJ is facing serious questions about whether it's been selectively removing files. So, widening and leading to accountability are two very different things. And you have behind closed doors depositions with transcripts released later, still leaving room for spin. The biggest name in the files still hasn't been called. And as every day drags on without a public, under oath accounting from the people who appear most frequently in the records, survivors are left waiting for a justice system that keeps promising transparency while delivering it in carefully controlled doses. And so in the meantime, we try to remain hopeful, but also, we'll see where all of this goes and whether any of it actually moves the needle. Will it get to a point where we actually do get accountability? But then from that, and actually the final thing that we need to talk about today is that half of Americans now want to abolish ICE. And that's not a progressive talking point. That's the polling. And today you had DHS Secretary Kristi Noem sitting in front of the House to answer for the agency's conduct, the killings of Renee Good and Alex Preddy, and the detention of American citizens who were never even charged with a crime. And also, if you're confused, you're like, wait, I'm getting the craziest sense of deja vu. Yesterday was her Senate hearing, and now you have the House hearing, and Democrats came in swinging. You had Representative Jamie Raskin opening up by accusing her of a cover-up over the Good and Preddy killings.
There have been 3 homicides in Minneapolis in 2026. Your agents committed 2 of them. Rather than work with state and local authorities to solve these homicides, you barred Minnesota's investigators from the crime scenes. You're denying them access to all the evidence that you have about the deaths of their citizens. It smells like a cover-up, and it makes me wonder who the real domestic terrorists are.
With Raskin then walking her through a series of yes or no questions about the use of lethal force.
Is it lawful for federal agents to shoot and kill a person for engaging in peaceful protest and nothing else? That's a yes or no question.
Each instances in peaceful protest, no, it's not.
Okay, good. Is it lawful for federal agents to shoot and kill a person for filming them on a public street? Yes or no?
No.
Okay. Is it lawful for federal agents to shoot and kill a person just because that person is lawfully carrying a holstered firearm under the Second Amendment in state law?
No.
And finally, yes or no, is it lawful for federal agents to shoot an innocent person or even a criminal suspect just for driving away from them, according to the Supreme Court?
No.
Then you had Representative Pramila Jayapal turning to ICE detaining American citizens, with her noting that yesterday Noem told the Senate that ICE agents can arrest citizens if they have reason to question their citizenship, if they're obstructing law enforcement, or for probable cause. And Jayapal actually brought American citizens who were detained by ICE into the hearing and turned to them directly.
Raise your hand if you were not charged with any crime following your detention. Not a single one of you were charged with a crime. Now raise your hand if any of you were not even asked to prove that you were U.S. citizens during your detention. Not a single one of you were even asked about your citizenship status, making it clear that DHS agents simply don't care that they're arresting U.S. citizens. Now please raise your hand if you were detained by ICE simply for legally protesting or monitoring ICE activity under your First Amendment rights. All 4 U.S. citizens have raised their hands.
And then when she asked Noam if she'd like to apologize, Noam said that she'd need more context. Right? And Jayapal just didn't let that slide.
You have actually turned the United States government against its own residents. Yours is a case of failed leadership, Secretary. You need to resign, be fired, or be impeached.
And like everything right now, this is not happening in a bubble. The public is turning on ICE in numbers that are very hard to ignore. According to YouGov, 50% of Americans now support abolishing ICE compared to 39% who oppose it. That is the first time in that outlet's polling that it has hit that threshold. And the breakdown is 77% of Democrats want to abolish it, 52% of independents, and nearly a quarter of Republicans. And then even with those who don't want to abolish the agency outright, the majority want restrictions. 59% say that agents shouldn't be allowed to wear masks, and 75%, including over half of Republicans, say that officers should wear uniforms that clearly identify them as ICE. And so ultimately, Noam, she can dodge questions in a hearing. She can ask for more context when confronted with citizens that are agency detained without cause. She can deflect to Biden and try to blame the media, but she cannot dodge the numbers. Half the country wants her agency gone, even more want it reformed, and the people that are agents killed and detained, they're showing up to these hearings in person. They're raising their hands. They are putting their faces on the record. And whether any of this translates to real consequences, I think it largely depends on the midterms in 2028. But in the meantime, the gap between what ICE is doing and what the American public is actually going to tolerate, that's widening fast. And every hearing like this one, it makes it harder to pretend otherwise. But that right there, my friends, you beautiful bastards, is the end of your Wednesday Philip DeFranco show. But that's also not where this rodeo has to end for you. And that's because in addition to maybe watching last night's Philip DeFranco show if you missed it, I just uploaded this week's brand new Crashing Out podcast with myself and Alex Perlman, and it was a doozy. Go watch, enjoy, subscribe if you haven't already, but no matter what you do, I'll see you right back here for even more tomorrow.
What? You're the messenger on this? I'm 41 years old! I've lived through how many of these fucking idiots' goddamn mistakes? They broke Alex, they broke him. Oops, here I go killing again. I just can't stop doing it.
Hey, there might be this guy where there's a billion red flags, but you can change him.
Primordial forces!
Hello. What do you think I was missing, ladies and gentlemen? No. It's the start of a new year, ladies and gentlemen. Had to put the